Thanks so much for coming out today. It's great to have you all here on this October 1st. It's hard to believe we're already into October. As a lot of you probably know already, this fall we are working our way through a sermon series that looks at the big ideas of the Reformation. This fall, October 31st to be exact, is the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther taking his ideas, they were called the 95 Theses, all of his big ideas, and he nailed them to the church door in Wittenberg, and it started this domino effect that changed the world. It changed our faith, and we're sitting here today because of that, 500 years ago. And so we're looking at all of the big ideas of Martin Luther. And today we have a really fun one. We're going to talk about politics. Who's excited? Yeah! All right, here's who I voted for. Then we're going to go around. No, I'm just kidding. But one of the things I think sometimes that gets lost in this story is how much of a political thriller the story of Martin Luther actually was. I think a lot of times, if you even know who the guy is on top of that, even if you know who he is, you just kind of see him as this old guy with this weird haircut, and he's got these long-winded explanations in these dusty old books. But actually, a lot of the stuff that he talked about was pretty radical. It really shook the foundations of the entire world society at the time, and it's a really interesting story. In Martin Luther's day, in Europe at least, the church was the king. The church was the biggest landowner. They had the most money. Every single European power with a king or a queen pledged their allegiance to the church. The church, in a sense, was the government. And all of the states were under the church. And it was this really interesting time because the church had so much power and they could literally get away with anything. The church would murder people that didn't agree with them. They would burn people at the stake. They would go out and they would do these inquisitions. If you were a heretic, you could be killed. You could be set on fire. It was a terrible, terrible thing. And I think the church stopped doing that about 4 years ago, which is great. That's not true. But it wasn't a good situation. There was conflicts because there would be these wars that would go out and people would fight in the name of the church. And Martin Luther would read his Bible and he'd read these verses about Jesus talking that the church is supposed to be the peacemakers, and there obviously is this conflict there. There was this conflict. And so when Martin Luther looked at what was going on, he looked at some of the abuses that the church was doing. He looked at the ways that the church had gotten away from the good news of Jesus that is revealed to us in the Bible. He said, we have to do something about this. And so he nailed his ideas on the door and he started a revolution. And what's interesting is it wasn't just a squabble in the church. This was a political thing. The world powers readjusted because of what Martin Luther did and what he said. In his own country of Germany, there were these princes that wanted to get free from the Catholic Church because they saw that people were paying their money to the Catholic Church. They wanted that tax money. They wanted those tax dollars. And so they went to Martin Luther and said, hey, we're going to support you. We're going to help you as long as at the end of this, we can be the head honchos around here and not the church. And so there was all of this political intrigue. There were all of these factions fighting with each other. It was a political revolution on top of a church one. Now, looking back, it's kind of interesting to think about that. It's kind of interesting to think that the church got in that position. It's not a great position for the church to be in because the church is supposed to be the body of Christ, living out the embodied ideas of Jesus and the embodied images and words of Jesus here on earth. And so Martin Luther said, this isn't right. We have to do something about this. This can't be the way that it goes. And so he came up with this idea that he called the two kingdoms. Two kingdoms. This was his crazy, radical idea at the time. He said, on the one hand, we have to live under the country or the rulers or the powers that we live. So for all of us, I would assume it's the United States, okay? We have to abide by those laws. We have to live under the rules of our state and our city and our government and our country. And those laws have to be put out in such a way that it promotes peace and it promotes prosperity for all people. It separates what's right and what's wrong, and it basically orders out what a good society should look like. Martin Luther said, okay, that's over here. That's great. It's the left side, okay? That's what we're going to do. But on the other hand, being a part of the church is fulfilling Jesus' call to be God's kingdom here on earth. And if we're going to be God's kingdom here on earth like Jesus talked about, the church shouldn't be messing around over on this side. The church should be something else completely different. The church shouldn't be calling the shots. We should be something else. We should be closer to what Jesus said. Now, one of my favorite quotes of all time is by Benjamin Franklin. When he talks about the governments of the world, he says this: in this world, nothing is certain but death and taxes. The only two things that we can count on, according to Benjamin Franklin, is that we're all going to die and all of us are going to pay our taxes, no matter what. Now that works over here. In God's kingdom, though, there's something else entirely going on. You see, Jesus was getting at this. When Pilate was asking him, are you a king of the Jews? What Pilate wanted to know is, Jesus, are you kind of propping yourself up as this competing power? Are you going to try to take us over? What's going on here? And Jesus said this: my kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here. This is where Martin Luther is getting this understanding. Jesus is saying that to be a part of the family of God, to be a person who follows Jesus, is to live under a different system. It's to live in a different way of living, a new kingdom. And in fact, what's certain in God's kingdom isn't death and taxes. It's life and it's gifts. That's what it means to live as people of God's kingdom. Yes, we live over here. We have our rules. We have our laws. Eventually we'll have death, and we certainly have taxes. But on the same hand, we live in God's kingdom, where there is life and there's gifts. The life is the promise of everlasting life that we get through Jesus Christ. And the gift is the free gift of God that we get and we receive apart from anything that we do. It's a gift. And it looks like this. Everybody grab your bulletins for a second. And I'd like you to turn, if you haven't been looking at it already while I've been preaching here, look at the part where it says sermon. It's like on page 6. Most of you are going to have a heart with a cross on it. Does anybody have a picture of Martin Luther's head? Anybody? Isaac, you got it? Okay. Is anybody else? Okay. I printed 2 special bulletins today. It's kind of like Willy Wonka's golden ticket a little bit. The other day I was at Caribou and I got my order and I pulled up and the person said, well, actually the car in front of you just bought your coffee and they want you to pay it forward. Okay, so I got a gift. I got a free coffee gift that day. So right now I'm going to give the 2 of you a gift. I have 2 Caribou cards that I got because you got the golden ticket. You didn't do anything to deserve this. You just happened to get the lucky bulletin. So Isaac, do you like coffee? Okay, good. There you go. And where was the other one? Oh, fantastic. Do you like coffee, Caribou coffee? Okay, good. This is all yours then. Excuse me, I'm going to sneak by you guys here. Thanks. I'm going to pass that back. That is your free gift today, okay? That's just a tiny glimpse of what it looks like to live in God's kingdom. We receive gifts from God on a daily basis. Everybody take a breath really quick. Take a breath in. Take a breath out. Do another one. Every breath that we breathe is a gift from God. It's a gift. God has us here, and he is sustaining us. He's putting the sun in the sky, the oxygen in the air, the water and the food, and the people and the clothing and the shelter that we need. Every single breath that we have is a gift. And that's what it means to live in God's kingdom. We receive the gifts from God. In a few moments, we're going to come up here for communion, and you're going to put your hands out, and you're going to receive some bread, and you're going to receive some wine, and you're going to experience and receive God's love and forgiveness through that bread and wine. And some of our kids are going to be doing that for the very first time today because of First Communion, and that is completely and totally a gift. That's what it means to live in God's kingdom. Under God's rule, we receive gifts. We don't give taxes. We don't earn our way there. We receive. I heard this great story this week from a friend of mine. And there was this pastor who had 2 kids, and they decided that they wanted to adopt a 3rd child. And so what they did is they went through the agency and they found this 8-year-old girl who needed a family. And so this pastor and his wife and their family adopted this 8-year-old girl. Now the thing about this 8-year-old though is that she had been a part of a family before this. She was an orphan, and a few years before that she had been adopted by another family, and for whatever reason it just didn't work out, and so that adoption was dissolved. She went back into the system, and then this pastor and his wife adopted this 8-year-old girl. And one day they were just sitting around the dinner table and they were just talking, and one of their kids said, "Dad, I think we should go to Disney World." And this pastor does speaking engagements all over the country. He looked at his schedule, and sure enough, he had one booked in Florida not too long from there. And he said, "Yeah, I think we could do that. We just adopted this girl. Let's make a big family vacation out of this. Let's go to Disney World." So they booked it. And as the trip got closer, this daughter who was adopted started acting up. She started hitting her siblings. She would write them nasty notes. She would be stubborn and throw temper tantrums for the parents, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And as the trip got closer and closer and closer, it got worse and worse and worse. And so finally, the dad just went up to her and he said, "Look, what's the deal here? What's going on?" She said, "Well, in my last family, they would go to Disney World, but I would always get left behind because they just didn't have enough money, and I was the adopted kid, and so I just didn't get to go." He said, "That's terrible." He said, "You're going to come. Don't worry about it." And the dad was hoping, okay, we smooth that over. Everything's going to be great. And it got worse. She acted up even more. It got worse and worse and worse. And the dad really wanted to use this as a teaching moment. He said, "I really wanted to say, okay, you better start behaving, otherwise you're not going to Disney World." But he just decided, I can't do that. She's already experienced that before. And so sure enough, they took her. And at Disney World, she was terrible. Terrible. Like one of those kids you just are ready for the vacation to end. And after about the 2nd day, she started getting really tired, and if you've ever been to Disney World, that usually happens about day 2. You've just had stimulation overload, and you're like, it's like Las Vegas. You're just ready to go home at that point. She got kind of weepy, and the dad went over to her and said, what's going on? She goes, "Dad, I realized something." He said, "Yeah, what's that?" She says, you actually took me to Disney World." And he said, "Well, yeah, of course." And she goes, "But I was really bad." He goes, "Yeah, you were." She goes, Why did you take me?" He said, "Well, we're taking a family trip, right?" And she said, "Yeah." He goes, "Are you a part of this family?" And at that moment, it hit her. She belonged to them. And this trip to Disney World was her gift because she was a part of the family. Clearly, she did not deserve this, but she was a part of their family. She was their daughter, and so therefore, of course, she would get to go to the magic kingdom. It's the second best kingdom after God's kingdom, in my opinion. But she got to go. That's what it means to be a part of God's kingdom. It's about receiving the gifts and experiencing the hope and the promise of everlasting life. And so it's true, we do live over here with our laws and our rules and our regulations and our governments. But as citizens of God's kingdom, of dual citizens of God's kingdom, we are also called to spread this kingdom out there. That's what Martin Luther did 500 years ago. That's what Jesus and his disciples did 2,000 years ago. And that's what we're called to do today. So live in God's kingdom. Receive his gifts. Experience the unconditional love of Jesus Christ. And in response to that, go out and share it with everybody else. And enjoy your coffee. Amen.